Castlevania Symphony of the Night is just one of those games that tickles my brain folds in all the right ways. I've been enraptured by it ever since I first played it back in high school, though I admit it's been a few years since I've picked the game back up again. The last time I remember actually sitting down and giving it a full playthrough was in my college dorm room, before the hope left my youthful spirit and I actually thought film school was more than just a money laundering operation for state universities. I don't want to talk about this anymore. My point being, I decided it was time to re-embrace Symphony, to drink deep the atmosphere of Castlevania once again. I was surprised by how much stuck with me, how so many details made marks on my mind and came back to the forefront of my memory the more I played. If you've played the game, you probably know why that is. The developers behind Symphony of the Night finally crafted this world, with each artist providing their own flair to the visuals and design that was executed beautifully through what must have been intense scripting work underneath all the pretty art. But how do we get here? How did Castlevania go from a level-to-level platformer to having an intricate, connected world for you to get lost in? I mean that literally, by the way. If you gave a homing pigeon an ice pick lobotomy, it would probably have a better sense of direction than I do. After Castlevania Rondo of Blood on the PC Engine, the higher-ups at Konami saw the approaching 4th generation of consoles and told their dream team to make them the ultimate Dracula game. Our heroes deliberated over what that might look like, what was worth changing, and what was too foundational to the series' identity to ever reimagine. Toru Hagehara, director of Rondo of Blood, was brought over to helm this new project, with Koji Igarashi as the programmer, scenario writer, and eventually co-director for the latter half of the project. Igarashi, or Iga as he tends to sign his work, is often credited as the auteur behind Symphony and the other Metroidvania titles in the series. The man himself is quick to point out the collaborative nature of Symphony's development, that these were a group of artists who all trusted each other to understand the vision and interpret it in their own ways. Iga probably had a large hand in shaping the vision itself, what with him being the writer in charge of capturing the emotional beats of the story and all, but this humble cowpoke is very intentional about bringing attention to all the different kinds of work that goes into crafting these things. For example, one thing the devs often reference in interviews is how much the art of Ayami Kojima sparked their inspirations. The gang knew that they were going to go grand for this one, and to help capture the new visual identity of this operatic adventure, Iga and crew bought a shit ton of books and thumbed through the covers until they found an artist they wanted to bring on. Kojima's illustrations breathe such rich life into this story and the franchise. These are the definitive takes on these characters. In the prior games, I got the sense that the team was pulling more from the Hammer horror zeitgeist for their interpretations of Dracula and his fiends, but Kojima's art is more gothic, regal, elegant. The designs are considered representations of the characters running around in the writers' heads, and her exquisite work provided the bedrock for much of the art direction we'll see going forward. I just wanted to call special attention to Kojima's paintings here. The look of Castlevania just doesn't get better than this. Her Dracula is the one I see in my head when I picture the guy. You know, there's one particular moment from an interview Iga gave on Double Fine's YouTube series Devs Play that I want to highlight. Iga talks about the icons for the different save files. There's a ton of these in the game, and he admits they basically just told the artist to make whatever, and they were all so cool the gang just threw them all in. The result is a diverse set of neat little icons that have almost no consistency between them. A metaphor for the game itself, Iga says. So that's how I'm going to frame Symphony of the Night for our purposes. A wonderful artistic melting pot that could have only come about because of the interaction of these particular craftspeople trusting each other to bring their own sensibilities to this vast canvas. Actually, that sounds mushy as shit. Let's go beat up my dad. It's not necessary to understand the events of Symphony of the Night, but since Symphony is a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood, I'd figure I'd cover it here to provide additional context for some of the characters we'll see pop up in our main narrative. The year is 1792. A dark cult has been engaging in a completely understandable but still illegal amount of human sacrifices to resurrect the evil Count Dracula. The Belmont called by fate to stop the sinister machinations of the Prince of Darkness is Richter, who takes up the vampire killer whip, his family's fabled weapon, and makes his way to Castlevania, Dracula's monument to sin. Dracula knew a Belmont would be on his way, so he sent Death to test our fresh-faced young hero. While this uncomfortable reminder of the thing waiting silently at the end of all human songs of suffering spits fireballs at you, the forces of darkness kidnap 4 maidens for a ritual at the behest of the Dark Priest Shaft, chief of Dracula's cultish earthly minions. Dracula promised him a new Prius, and Shaft was like, "What the fuck is a car?" One of the maidens that was taken from this town from Simon's Quest was your girlfriend Annette, giving us some personal stakes in this battle with an undead rich guy. As Richter Belmont, it's up to you to cut down the minions of depravity and liberate the maidens from Shaft's vile grasp. Also, you can face off against the wicked Prince of Evil, Count Dracula, this creature that has haunted your bloodline for untold generations. Can you, Richter Belmont, defeat the creature that cemented the very legacy that now calls upon you to take up arms and step into the long shadow cast by the valiance of your ancestors? He can with save states. This game is incredible, by the way. The designers have made every enemy encounter beatable with the whip, and every platforming challenge is crafted around Richter's movement. He's on the heavier side, but the jump isn't as stiff as the original NES games. You have a little bit of wiggle room to your movement once you're in the air. But it still requires a degree of intentionality as to when you decide to commit to a leap. But here's the thing. All the levels are built with that in mind. So once you get the rhythm down and you're strutting around these stages to what feels like the desired paths, pushing past enemies and stage obstacles, God, it feels amazing. And the enemies. Since each enemy is made to be whip bitches, the devs have turned the thing into a unique weapon that requires a degree of understanding to master, but damn, if you've ever wanted to really feel the intimate connection a trained vampire hunter like Richter must have with this holy heirloom, then Rondo of Blood nails that through the conversation you have with each enemy in your path, understanding the distance and timing required to effectively engage with the undead hordes. This, coupled with a fine-tuned movement that gives you just enough mobility but still requiring accuracy in your timing, makes for incredible levels that are challenging to complete but always feeling just within reach. Always like you understand what elements of the game's design you need to master to tackle any particular obstacle. Once it all clicks, it's razor sharp and fun as hell. You're also not limited to one particular style of play thanks to the sub-weapons. You're fucking Richter Belmont. You don't feel like dealing with the most annoying crows ever encountered by God's most mistaken creation? Snipe them down with a handful of dagger. That flexibility extends even past being restricted to a singular playable character. The first of the 4 maidens you rescue is one 12-year-old Maria Renard. Okay, so Richter is actually a huge failure to his family's storied legacy because he dies at one point, so Maria has to tag in and use her increased movement and animal buddies to fuck up Carmilla in the preceding stage of fleshy sin puppets. She's a fun alternate player character, and the devs really ran with the bit of playing a Castlevania game as a tween girl in a pink dress who grew up before slavery was illegal. Her dove hurling skills and less restrictive movement make her the easier character to play as if you're trying to get the hang of this game. Eventually, though, when Richter makes it to the pearly gates, God is horrified at the prospect of this 12-year-old girl throwing birds at the Prince of Darkness, so he sends Richter back to continue his mission. The young man makes good on his second chance and cuts down whatever hellish beast foolish enough to cross his path. And fighting those beasts rock. If each enemy was a miniature test of your movement and whippage skill, then the bosses are that beefed up to make for really engaging encounters. All their attacks are readable and encourage aggression while staying on the move to avoid their flashy attacks. They're a highlight of an already rockstar 2D platform. The music is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that description too. This soundtrack is a new favorite. It's in the infamous Castlevania clock tower that Richter finally rescues poor Annette. In this version of our story, Richter lets the other 2 maidens die a horrible death because he's too lazy to replay the stages they're kept in. Annette begs him to hang up the vampire killer here and take the 2 of them far from the vile clutches of Dracula's malicious forces. But Richter knows that isn't his destiny. He tells Annette that he's a vampire hunter, and that his fate lies at the top of Castlevania for the final showdown with ultimate evil. We leave her and defeat Shaft, steeling ourselves for our ascension of Dracula's castle. After what is probably the only classic Dracula boss my lobotomized ass will ever be able to defeat, Richter takes to the cliffside and looks out at Castlevania before riding away to a peaceful life with Annette, now a hardened veteran of the war on evil, an inheritor forced to rise to the solemn duty tied to his very blood. He also had some help from his new friend Maria, who he's thankful to for keeping between them that time that he died. Right from the start, Symphony of the Night is preparing you for a grand Gothic adventure. The choir piece that plays over the menus sets the tone perfectly. It's so ethereal and haunting, with a somber undercurrent running through the whole sound. This is the first piece of music you'll hear from composer Michiru Yamane. She joined the series with Castlevania Bloodlines, a Genesis title released in '94. Symphony's art director, Osamu Kasai, asked to bring her onto the dev team, and Yamane absolutely outdid herself. Bloodlines' music rocks, but this CD quality sound breathes life into every piece, whether Yamane is leaning more on her classical roots or experimenting with different flares of rock and roll. This is an incredible soundtrack, and it's one of the first things the game presents to us. Dr. Piss would like to diagnose this game with bitchin' music disorder. The remedy is 3 pills daily, and you gotta let me put my finger in your ass. We're then greeted to a stunning FMV of Castlevania itself, as the camera pans around this model of the titular creature of chaos. We get to circle around the whole structure, but the camera settles on the grand staircase, setting the mood perfectly. Castlevania itself goes from a distant shape to an imposing figure we're about to conquer. Well, first we get a recap of the ending of Rondo of Blood, although this prologue section is titled after that other Castlevania game, and not the one this came from, and that should upset you almost as much as it upsets me. Hey, Richter's certainly more athletic here. He's still a heavy, beefy Belmont boy, but his control is more fluid. I can actually influence the arc of Richter's jump to a higher degree than barely at all. And I can dangle my whip around like my great-granddaddy used to do on the Super Nintendo. Stock up on hearts and climb your way into Dracula's domain. This triggers a cutscene where we get our first taste of the game's voice acting. It's rather infamous for its cheese, but I'm going to bite the irony bullet on this one and say I actually really enjoy these performances. Ramsey Scott, or Scott McCulloch as he was credited here, gives somewhat stiff line reads as Richter, but it doesn't even remotely approach being laughably bad. There's some pathos to his performance that genuinely does give me a sense of Richter's character through the vocals. Michael Gwynn as Dracula is a treat too. Iga has written the Count to be the aristocratic, thoughtful villain you'd see in literature, and Gwynn brings that air of sophistication while also creating an imposing presence when the drama calls for it. And Robert Belgrade as Alucard, well, we'll get to him. Anyway, I love this scene. Richter tells Dracula that his kind has no place in this world, kinda racist, but Dracula makes the point that humanity was responsible for his resurrection. Richter doesn't really get why someone would want to worship a vampire who makes slaves of mortal men, prompting Dracula to try and make this really deep point about how all religions basically do that anyway, but Richter clearly doesn't get what point Dracula is trying to make because he's a fucking meathead. This causes Dracula to get upset and throw his chalice, leading to an even easier boss than the other time I killed this geezer. Richter can still item crash, and 2 of these holy rainstorms is usually enough to cause Dracula to combust, but if you do get your ass handed to you, our good pal Maria steps in and grants us strength with the power of Chinese mythology. With her help, Richter Belmont lays one final strike of the vampire killer across the shins of Count Dracula, returning him to the grave. This opening crawl fills in the gaps between Rondo Blood and the beginning of this adventure. 4 years after defeating Count Dracula, Richter Belmont mysteriously disappears without a trace. Maria Renard, now a teenage young woman, scours Europe for her lost companion. A year into her search, she discovers that Castlevania has mysteriously reappeared, and like some twisted lighthouse, it beckons to her, tantalizing her with answers she so desperately seeks. Meanwhile, Alucard, son of Dracula, has been in what was meant to be an eternal slumber to free the mortal world from his cursed bloodline. It was Alucard who helped Trevor Belmont, the first of the Belmont clan to face the Count, put an end to his father's goal of wiping humanity from the planet. You might be wondering why Dracula's baby boy wasn't down with the genocide thing back on the NES. I was wondering that too, on account of every time I try to play Castlevania 3, I can feel the game shoving bamboo sticks beneath my fingernails. So if they tell you in that one, I'll never find out. All we need to know right now is that Alucard has risen, and he too catches wind of Castlevania's resurgence, years ahead of its natural reincarnation every century. He takes up arms and storms the castle, ready to once again put an end to this madness. Now the game really starts. Alucard begins at the castle entrance, cutting down whatever beast stands in his way. It's not a wide selection of enemies up front, but you feel so powerful as each one explodes with one swipe of your sword. And it's here you'll first be blown away by Alucard's control. This beautiful lady is one nimble vampire. His movement is buttery smooth, with the perfect amount of weight behind these gorgeous animations. They've programmed the arc of his leaps to have just the right velocity to them, and the button press is responsive enough that I can intuitively feel the micro adjustments necessary to get the level of height I want for traversal. I don't even have to really think about the movement. It's so fluid that you can just slip right in and feel in total control of where you go and how you'll get there. It's a hard sensation to express if you've never controlled Alucard yourself, but trust me, this is the best feeling 2D protagonist I have ever touched. But not like touched in a weird way. I saved that for Donkey Kong. Our power trip is not to last, however, because Death pops in and pimps my shit. If anyone could do it, it's him, I guess. He does it to everybody. Well, looks like we'll just have to box the shit out of skeletons for a little while. At least this room ahead gives me a tingling sensation in my frontal lobe. Check out these new stairs. Gone are the days of being pelted to death by rib cages because the Belmont in question is too scared of heights to jump off these things. The more you explore, the more you get a feel for all that's changed. Obviously, the castle is now one interconnected map, but we also get to play around with early game RPG mechanics, leveling up and finding weapons and gear to buff our stats early in the game. This system will become more involved later, but even in the early game, you see fun ways these items can affect Alucard, like how wearing sunglasses at night makes you stupider. The different capes are even reflected visually, which is a much greater benefit than being able to get stabbed more times. The first area of the castle Alucard will have to traverse is the Alchemy Laboratory, which is probably the only place you could get penicillin in 1797. Or the funny red skeleton would just rub a leech on you. It occurs to me I don't know what alchemy is. An impassable blue door forces us east, and we fight our first boss here, Sluggo and the Flying Idiot. A fun early game test of our abilities that lets us know to be on our toes, for behind any door there might be another hellish creation looking to stop us from working out our parental issues. You'll also start finding shortcuts between different areas of the alchemy lab and eventually the marble gallery. You see the ways areas on the map flow into each other, and as you explore you can start to plan out routes for your return trip later, keeping track of the areas not yet accessible to Alucard. The marble gallery is a particular favorite of mine. I love the stained glass and the gargantuan pillars lining the background, and how it opens up to an almost cathedral-like area as you descend. It's also the first time the game really clicked with me. Opening up this shortcut to the entrance was so exciting because I saw the possibilities of this kind of streamlined open design. I felt the guiding hand of those benevolent Japanese gods show me that this world was going to be just compact enough to easily navigate, while allowing for some freedom in between connecting the major dots on the map. I could vaguely see the path I need to take the more I explored, and there's that feeling of excitement when you finally get that upgrade and piece together all the areas you'll be able to revisit and see all the new gear and challenges tailored to your abilities at that particular point in the game. It's this razor-sharp blend of open-ended design with just enough intentionality to keep me motivated and feeling like I'm on the right path. I think I appreciate this feeling because in real life I tend to experience a lack of motivation stemming from the existential malaise that results from staring deeply into the cold, black void at the center of reality. That or I just get lost too much in open world games. Don't diagnose me. Returning to the upper level of the gallery leads us to this giant clock tower, which seems redundant to have here since there's an even bigger clock tower maybe 100 yards that way, but maybe the Fleamen just wanted to be able to tell time indoors. They don't make watches that fit their tiny little wrists. Anyway, in this clock tower is Maria Renard. Maria is disconcerted by our appearance, not sure what to make of us. We tell her our intentions to destroy Castlevania and, with our goals aligned, she decides to trust us, but only just. After this brief introduction, Maria leaves us be, resigning us to the company of the abominations just outside. Another blue door will force you down the gallery through to the castle's outer wall. From here you can access a number of different areas after facing some strange alchemical duplicate of ourselves. You know, shit like this is probably why Alucard has daddy issues. This ain't normal. The first new area you'll have access to is the Long Library, where you fight nightmare blobs and books are trying to kill you, thus proving that learning is indeed evil. In here you'll meet the librarian, an old acquaintance. Alucard clearly likes him because he knows he can cut a deal. The librarian is willing to sell out his landlord for these cool rings I found.
Thank you!
From him you can buy armor and weapons, as well as some other goodies, but the thing you need to progress is the Jewel of Open, so we can pass through those blue doors from earlier. You can also buy some magic scrolls from the guy to learn the inputs needed for different spells, but here's a pro gamer tip. You already have access to these, so just mash the controller until you do a few and then read the inputs later. It works eventually. Look, this is the kind of shit you do on a budget, alright? Your curiosity might have you hungry to further explore the outer wall before circling back around because there's this tantalizing elevator you've got to get working again. That forces you to ascend these stairs, dealing with what I think are some of the most out there enemies so far. The enemy variety in Symphony of the Night is insane, as I'm sure you can see. A lot are reused from Rondo of Blood, but I don't mind that. They still challenge Alucard's movement and offense in a fun way, albeit differently than if you were a traditional Belmont. Reactivate the elevator to get access to Alucard's wolf form. I love that they ran with the vampiric elements of the guy's character and turned them into gameplay mechanics. This won't be the only transformation we see him morph into. From there, further investigation of the outer wall is likely to lead you to this teleporter, which sends you back to the entrance. These are a godsend. They cut back on backtracking significantly. You can't freely choose which one to warp to, but each one is visually distinct, and their addition just adds another layer to your traversal and how you plan out routes you want to take to further explore the castle. I know how much you love blue squares after all. Personally, I'm more of a red triangle guy myself, but these are fine. It's not a long trek back to that first blue door from earlier, and past it we once again run into Maria, who's gotten herself lost. The castle has changed since she's last been here, which doesn't surprise Alucard, who tells her Castlevania is a living creature of chaos that returns always different than before. Now not able to trust her memories of this place, Maria leaves us to continue her scouring of the castle, wishing us good luck on our equally dire quest. Now we head to the Royal Chapel, which seems counterintuitive for a vampire to have, but one can appreciate that Dracula is respectful of his employees' personal religions. In fact, in the version of Symphony for the Sega Saturn, you can explore the Twisted Mosque and the Haunted Temple. What a caring boss. There's also a confessional booth, but you're punished for using it, because in here you keep that shit to yourself. You'll mostly be ascending bell towers and dealing with the most annoying enemies Symphony has on offer. Those fucking crows. If you can handle the flying bastards, you should always try to get to the tops of these towers for some decent equipment this early on. I love the work the devs have done to make each weapon unique. Some are reflected visually in the in-game sprite work, but even just the different names, descriptions, and icons for all of these things is deeply appreciated. I may not see too much of a difference in Alucard's sword swipe, but I can still grow attached to different weapons as I use them. Symphony as a whole is just bleeding with details like that. I couldn't possibly highlight them all. It'll have to be a personal experience, seeing the way all these little details interact with each other and coalesce into a full, beautiful portrait of a game. A room full of spikes prevents us from exploring westward, so we ascend further and get to take out any bird-related anger on this hippogriff boss. Maria was watching us, and she thinks we look pretty sick beating up that giant parrot. Alucard can't take a compliment though, because he snaps and demands to know her business here. Maria reveals she's looking for one Richter Belmont, and we get a fun Castlevania 3 callback as Alucard recalls the sprite of the long-dead Trevor. He promises to keep an eye out for her friend, this descendant of the companion he once knew, and Maria quips that he might be a gentleman after all. I love the way these interactions are written. This is the first person Alucard would have spoken to since Trevor, Sypha, and Grant some 300 years ago. He's reserved around Maria, but is still mannerly, reflecting that aristocratic upbringing provided by Daddy Vlad. Seeing the stern and stoic Alucard show a little warmth towards Maria that grows the deeper he gets into this mystery is a small but serviceable arc that's conveyed entirely through the brief dialogue and vocal performances. The chapel ends in a long corridor that connects us to the castle keep. But you may notice that there's a really cool looking necklace being guarded by some midgets on pigeons just above you. Survive the airborne ankle biters. Look, is calling them fleamen any less offensive? Regardless, you get a new relic, the Leap Stone. This lets Alucard grow wings for a double jump, and now the game has really opened up. If I bought this stupid fucking crystal, I'm inclined to use it. So the first place I decided to double jump around is the marble gallery, where that other door is glowing a tantalizing shade of blue. Behind it is a mysterious switch that opens the way to our plumbing. You've got to cut through some annoying enemies to get to the cavern part of these underground caverns, but when you make it down there, you're in for some fun encounters. Not against these toads, though. They can gargle my nuts. No, through here you find a Scylla worm and this lady made out of dog heads. It's also through here that you find out Alucard is allergic to water, which probably contributed to his drinking problem, but it's worth getting a little wet because past that weird looking chick you get the coolest cape in the game. Check out this crystal cloak. A cloak made of crystals. It's got pretty good defense this early in our run, but come on, look how cool this translucent cape is. Alucard rocks the purple highlights too. This whole outfit is just very cunty. Can someone tell me if I use that right? Anyways, if you travel into the chillier part of these caverns, you meet the ferryman, who promises to take you somewhere interesting. It would be cool if you just took me where I told you to fucking go, but it's his boat. Grab the merman statue, now you can summon the world's most mentally ill taxi driver. And ain't that saying something? Ooh, right above where you parked that canoe is a shortcut to the castle entrance. This is good, because I need to head back towards the clock tower where we met Maria. See, you may be wondering where to go next. After Maria leaves the room in our first encounter, the game makes a point to show this statue emerging from the wall, conveying to you that this is a path you're going to want to investigate later. You might return to that room and find the way is closed off to you though, and that's because this clock actually functions and cycles through opening that pathway every other minute. Why the hell would they do that? Symmetry? You double jump up here to gain access to Ulrox's quarters. Ulrox. You know, from that German expressionist film, Knots for Tutu. There's not a lot of this place we can explore with our current abilities, so we get funneled into another new area, the Colosseum. This is where the game really wants you to go. In the arena itself, you're in for a surprise, for we get to meet the new king of the castle, and it's none other than Richter himself. Alucard recognizes the scent of Belmont blood before Richter sicks two of his old enemies on us. After dispatching the werewolf and the Minotaur, Alucard is left with more questions than answers, as the mystery of Castlevania's return thickens with this revelation. Your abilities are starting to domino now too, for just outside the arena is another transformation for all Alucard, the form of mist. Right now all it can do is pass through certain grades, but each transformation will get upgraded, so just hold your fucking horses, alright? The game placed a library card just outside the arena as a not so subtle way of telling us to teleport our ass back to that homeless librarian. We'll certainly do that. But first I want my shield rod. Oh hey, this thing was hounding me in Rondo of Blood. I guess Richter hated it so much he turned it into set dressing. You know, I'm going to call special attention to the backgrounds here. They're overflowing with detail, even in areas like the Colosseum where there's not a lot of depth to imply, but still each room is given a special background to tell a unique story. Some areas we'll get to later have an atmosphere that's entirely conveyed through the background designs. They do an incredible job of conveying the immensity of these spaces too. Apparently the parallax scrolling was a pain in the ass to program in, so I gotta say, the fact they managed to pull it off this beautifully makes the inclusion of these painted backgrounds nothing short of a great artistic achievement. Symphony really is such a gorgeous treat to the eyes. Heading to the library will prompt us to float on up to the lip of this platform that, prior to getting our cool necklace, was just out of reach. Put down some midgets wearing body armor. You know, it occurs to me that they must have insane lower body strength to move like that. That's probably the scariest thing about it. Hiding out in this corner of the library is the Lesser Demon, who's too much of a coward to face me on his own, so he summons those nightmare blobs and men made of mud. He's actually right to be terrified, because this boss doesn't take long. Become mist and float on into this little room that holds our final transformation, the Soul of Bat. Alucard can now do that signature vampire thing and fly around as this massive rodent, complete with wings made from your cloak. God, that's cool. But with this transformation, pretty much the entirety of the map is open for us to explore. The number of rooms you can now access has skyrocketed with this ability. The first place I went was to go get a fairy friend, but I forgot to turn her on at first. I have that problem with most women. The fairy is my favorite familiar in the game, though, because she'll automatically use items in your inventory if you get low on health or fight a boss strong in a particular attribute. She's one dependable lady, and I love her for this. Next, I want to finally explore the clock tower, but not the plot-important clock tower, the really big clock tower where you can hop around these massive gears so Dracula can tell what time it is from a few miles away. At this point, I'm feeling very powerful as Alucard. He mows down enemies and has such a versatile arsenal that I feel very rewarded for having gone out of my way to explore and find some of these items. The transformations also ensure that you're in complete control of the pace at which you traverse. Don't feel like stopping to cut down a long hallway of low-level enemies? Now you can fly right over them, and maybe find a pathway tucked away only in winged reach. Man, I couldn't tell you the last time I've been in the clock tower. This area is completely optional, so all the goodies you find here are going to be unique weapons and armor to further buff your arsenal. It's a compact area that I think is just the right size, and we cap it off with a fun boss encounter that exits out to the grand staircase, now in ruins. We'll get there eventually. We've still got some flying to do. Most of Olrox's quarters is only accessible via the bat transformation, which makes sense given this guy is also a vampire. Olrox doesn't even bother locking his chamber door. He just put a low ceiling in front of it and goes in and out of bat form to grab groceries. Yeah, you can fight Olrox in a pretty decent encounter. I like to imagine that he started crashing on his old pal Vlad's couch after a messy divorce, and after a few hundred years of this, Dracula was like, you can just move in. Defeating Olrox will provide the path to the bat's echolocation ability, which will help in the next area because we're going spelunking again. But we're going deeper than you might think, for past this massive waterfall is a switch that spawns a skeletonate by this wooden bridge, and his explosive barrel will clear the way to the abandoned mine, which connects to the catacombs, our next major area. This place is weird. Prisoners were chained to the wall and rotted away down here, and some of the enemies are robed in strange religious garb as they carry their cursed cargo. The main thing you'll need to do is echolocate around this pointy room to grab the Spikebreaker mail, but if you fill out the map, you'll be able to grab plenty of optional gear. There's a lot of customization options on offer here in Symphony. I'll admit, a good few of these stat buffs I don't see making too much of a difference, so sometimes it can be a little bit of a letdown grabbing an item that isn't particularly useful, but there's still plenty of unique and powerful toys around many corners. And there's so many ways that these items interact with each other. I love the RPG mechanics at play. Seeing particular stats go up and letting me choose what kind of Alucard I'm going to play as really fondles my brain in all the right ways. Further cleanup of the caverns will net you the Holy Symbol, or, as I think it should have been called, the Pope's Snorkel. Now you can fill out all those underwater areas without fear of Alucard combusting because he got a little wet. But there's a giant drop we fell through earlier that has some rooms hidden on the way down that you need to be a flying rodent to access. Doing so will introduce you to a freaky looking save room, which Alucard just throws himself into. He's taken to a nightmare where he's forced to relive his mother's death. This is where we get some insight into Dracula and Alucard's motivations. Alucard's mother was a human, burned at the stake for witchcraft back in the 1400s. Dracula, driven by unspeakable grief and rage, seeks to wipe humanity from the face of the planet, spurring Alucard to join forces with Trevor and put a stop to his father's genocide. But the dream doesn't play out as Alucard remembers it. With her last breath, Lisa Tepesh tells Alucard to despise humans, to hate them and slay them at every corner.
Begin by slaying that one over there.
The fuck did that guy do? This isn't how it happened. Alucard realizes the illusion and breaks free of the spell, revealing the architect of this nightmare as the demonic succubus. Cut her down and set her soul adrift in the dream realm for all eternity. This is where I want to highlight Belgrade's performance as Alucard. Usually so stern and resolute, the poor guy sounds like a scared child calling out for his mother as he watches her burn at the stake. But when he realizes he's being had, he reasserts a commanding presence and coldly delivers his final line to his psychic torturer.
Death in the dream world will set your soul wandering for eternity, demon.
I mean, it's not an Oscar-winning performance or anything, but I think it does a good job in humanizing Alucard while keeping him that cool, determinate character that makes him such a fun protagonist to play as. His confidence is your confidence, but in the end, he still cares for his mother so much that he cried for her when made to see her die once again. Beating the succubus rewards you with a strange gold ring, and with the caverns explored, it's time to head back to the chapel to put our Spikebreaker mail to good use on the westward passage from earlier. You can't just use the bat here either. Alucard needs to be standing to mystify himself past the grate. At the very end of this hallway, we run into Maria again, who asks if we've any luck hunting for Richter. We tell her the bad news. We ran into a Belmont in the Colosseum, and he has claimed ownership of Dracula's castle, making him the very threat the two have come to stop. Maria refuses to accept this, and she leaves to confirm what is now her worst fear. We pick up a silver ring after she's gone, completing our duology of jewelry. The rings each bear one half of an inscription, which together tells us to wear them in the clock tower. You know, the plot-important clock tower, not the other clock tower that has a special title card which signifies it is, in fact, a giant clock tower, while the other one was just a room. I'm only upset because when I was 15, I thought to myself, do they mean the room we met Maria in, or the area actually called the clock tower? And then I tried the latter first and wasted my fucking time. Do as the inscription commands and you'll gain access to the center of the castle, where we once again find poor Maria. She tells us that we were right, that Richter has turned to the side of evil and now lords over Castlevania. She still asserts that something must be controlling him, that he would never fall into the clutches of chaos of his own free will. She gives us the holy glasses to see past evil illusions, so that we might destroy the force corrupting the legendary vampire hunter.
Thank you. 'Tis best then if you pray for the soul of your friend.
God, he's so cool. Now we can ascend past the ruins of the Grand Staircase to face Richter, where he himself had slain Dracula 5 years before. Alucard demands to know why Belmont would seek to resurrect Count Dracula, and Richter tells him that his role in the war between light and dark is entirely dependent on Dracula's natural reappearance, and that once the Count has been killed, Richter remains without a purpose. By bringing Dracula back to life, the fight will go on forever, and he will always have a grand battle worth waging. Alucard tells Richter that if those are his true feelings, then so be it, and the two begin a battle that will be told through generations. But with the holy glasses, we see something sinister. A green orb of evil intent is puppeting Richter, just as Maria suspected. This is our true target, to destroy it and free Richter from its control. This is the most intense boss so far. You're facing a bona fide Belmont, and he pulls no punches. Richter is stacked with all the abilities from the opening, as well as multiple sub-weapons and item crashes. You're not against some demon conjured by hell's magic. No, this is a trained and well-equipped vampire hunter, and his moveset reflects this. Even the arrangement that plays behind us sounds like the man is fighting for control, with the notes of Richter's theme bursting between the synths, like he's desperately pulling against this unnatural force corrupting his soul. And hey, if that's the case, I'd appreciate it if he went a little easier on me. God damn it, man, cut it out, I'm trying to help you. Destroying the orb reveals that the man behind all this insanity is none other than the Dark Priest Shaft, whose spirit still lingers in the realm of the living. Defeated, but not down for the count, Shaft calls upon his dark magic and summons an inverted Castlevania as his fortress. The guy must really want that Prius. Richter, now in control of his actions once again, is horrified by what he's done. Maria arrives and thanks us for freeing her friend, and in return, Alucard tells them to get to safety while he teleports to the reverse castle, ready to put a definite end to Shaft's conspiracy to resurrect his father. Huh? Oh. Sorry about that. A lot of my footage is just me sitting on the pause menu because my cat has started doing this really cool thing where she refuses to drink from her water bowl and will only sip from my bathroom faucet. So long as I'm watching her do it. Say hello to Princess Ugo, everybody. I only bring her up because she's like a psychic vampire, in that she's siphoning my patience. So this next part is a little contentious. Igarashi has said that the intention behind the reverse castle was the idea that players would finish the game by killing Richter first, and then feel inclined to fill out the map on repeat playthroughs and discover a whole other castle as a bonus for going out of your way to save Mr. Belmont. That's a really cool idea in theory, but the execution is a little more complicated. Because you have all your movement upgrades by this point, you're free to explore the inverted castle in any order you choose. Scattered throughout the map are the bosses of the original Castlevania. Each of them contains a piece of Dracula himself, and you'll need all 5 to access the center of this upside-down colossus and take the fight to the disembodied Shaft. The main issue with the inverted castle is that these rooms weren't designed for traversal both ways. I'm sure some degree of consideration went in to make sure the landscapes weren't, impossible to move through the other way around, but you have to transform constantly in order to get around the new upside-down level design. One of the last upgrades you get before the fight with Richter is the Power of Mist, letting you remain a cloud until your magic meter runs out, and I'm convinced they put it there just so you can float away in this topsy-turvy fortress. And that sucks, because Alucard feels so good to move around with naturally that I feel like a part of the game is missing if I'm just going to fly around these disjointed level designs instead of using that immaculate control to interact with more intentionally crafted areas. And some rooms in here are just aggravating. You can skip the reverse clock tower. Just fucking skip it. In fact, let me give you a tip if you plan on going batty all up in this inverted carnival of horrors. The wing smash is done by holding the jump button and inputting a 3/4 circle turn on the D-pad. This place just became 1,000 times more manageable. Between the power of Wolf and Mist, it's not painful to explore this place, but it certainly kneecaps the pacing. It's not all bad though. One thing I do really enjoy about the inverted castle is that the devs throw some insane enemies at you, both in terms of behavior and their sprite work. The hardest regular encounters of the game are found here, and it's a welcome change from watching everything explode in one sword swipe. In places like the Forbidden Library, where the flip level design doesn't make you use too much black magic to traverse it, Alucard's movement is put to the test with some very unique enemies that, for the first time in a while, challenge you and demand you pay attention to their behavior and attacks if you plan to counter them. I mean, I still didn't come close to dying in here, but these creatures hit so hard that you won't be able to just tank the damage every time. That is something I'm going to give the game a little shit for though, the balancing. Symphony of the Night gets real easy real fast if you're intentional about exploring both castles. That part I actually don't mind. Because I went out of my way to find powerful weapons and leveled up through so many optional encounters, I happen to find the power trip pretty rewarding. The problem for me is that because you can explore the inverted castle in whatever order you choose, some of the rewards you'll find just won't be as useful as the gear you're currently using. Some of that gear you probably grabbed in the main castle anyway, which makes finding a dinky sword in what would be a late game area for you especially disappointing. Still, I think enough was done to justify going out of your way to hunt for new gear. Or old gear, as it were, because Alucard will eventually find the items that Death stole from us at the beginning of the game. The Alucard set is my favorite collection of equipment in the game. It's always a treat for me to recollect it. Plus, it's not like the only rewards you'll be getting for exploration are stats going up. There's plenty of optional boss encounters Alucard butts into as he makes his way around this place. These are a reward to me in and of themselves, just because of how fun or challenging they are. They certainly put up a bigger fight than some of the mandatory bosses, and, like the new enemies, they control the pace of the encounter in such a way that forces you to actively participate with much of the game's systems and experiment with how Alucard will tackle the situation. I see that aspect as an extrapolation of the design ethos behind the classic Vanias. Although, I'm just guessing on that part because my skill ceiling when it comes to those games is about 3 inches off the ground. Dracula's curse just seeks to hurt me. The difference here is the RPG mechanics that allow for such a flexible and versatile Alucard. The possibilities for how I'm going to approach my current situation have skyrocketed with this level of adaptability. This is one well-endowed magic lesbian. The way I usually tackle the inverted castle is to circle my way inward to the center of the structure. Along the way, you'll face Big Bat Jr. at the end of the reverse clock tower, Frankenstein's bastard in the reverse outer wall, my mom in the antechapel, and the guy who made God so pissed off he sent those locusts in Deathwing's lair. In a reference to Simon's quest, each of them is guarding a piece of your dad, and you'll need them all to unlock the castle's center. That's something I noticed while playing Rondo of Blood, actually. There's clearly a lot of reverence for the past DNA of the series in these titles, and I think it does a lot to solidify the identity of Castlevania as a series. In the caves just before the floating catacombs, Dracula's right-hand man is waiting for you. And just when you think death is down for the count, he erupts into a second phase that is even easier than the first one. Introduce the Grim Reaper to the business end of your sword to obtain the Eye of Dad, the final piece necessary to reach Shaft. I'd also like to point out the horrific implications of what we've just done. Does death go back to business as usual after this, or do people just not die for a while? You're telling me that I have to go through this slog of an existence and now it doesn't even end? What a ripoff. With all your father's body parts tucked away in your pocket, you can now unlock the elevator to the center of the inverted castle, where we make our stand against the Dark Priest. He reveals that his brainwashing of Richter was meant to remove the biggest threat to Dracula's resurrection by converting him into the very instrument of the Count's return. Alucard engages this ghostly priest in battle, and it ends with Alucard shattering Shaft's soul, condemning him to annihilation.
You claim to love the darkness. Go then and dwell there for all eternity.
God, he's so cool. But Shaft exits the stage peacefully, content in the knowledge that his goal was achieved. The lights dim and we're transported to a new arena where our father reveals himself, freshly resurrected and ready to wipe out the scourge of humanity. Dracula beckons us to join him, to reject our mother's blood. Alucard will do no such thing. We brandish our weapon as Count Dracula reveals to us his true form, a freaky-looking chair. His lazy ass couldn't even be bothered to stand up to fight us, so he just turned into demonic furniture. Anyway, this is our final boss. My only real point of contention is that I wish Alucard was given a few more invincibility frames, because if your dad's giant hand smacks you into the corner, you're going to take quite a few shots of touch damage if you don't mist out of there pretty quick. For whatever reason, Dracula's right hand in particular always gives me that trouble. Other than that, I think this boss is really fun. The cramped space of the arena really makes you pay attention to where you're going to move to avoid getting hit, and where you'll need to go to score some hits on Dracula's massive form. You've got to stay on the move and weave around whatever your papa throws at you. Upon dealing the final blow, Alucard drops my favorite line in the game.
Go back whence you came. Trouble the soul of my mother no more.
Before dying once again, Dracula asks us to recount to him our ma's last words, and we revealed the true final testament of Lisa Tepesh, not the perversion from earlier. Alucard tells his father that she asked of him not to take revenge on humankind, to do them no harm if he could not live amongst them. And, tragically, it was with her last breath that Lisa told Alucard she would love his father for all eternity. Man, that's good stuff. With Dracula's death, Castlevania is finally obliterated. We meet Richter and Marie on the cliffside after the castle is destroyed. Richter apologizes for his role in this catastrophe, but Alucard assuages his guilt, telling him that he had his own reasons for confronting his father. Then Alucard quotes a phrase that won't exist for another 100 years, so maybe in Castlevania canon, John Stuart Mill is just Alucard's pen name. Maria asks what's next for Alucard, and he tells her that he believes his very blood to be cursed, and that the best thing for humanity would be for him to return to his eternal slumber. He bids them a final goodbye before leaving to go back to bed. But Maria can't just let the poor guy exit her life like that, and Richter assures her that she might very well be the one to save his tortured soul. Speaking of Richter, if you input his name on a new save, you get to play as the guy during the main adventure. There's no story here. Your only goal is to defeat Shaft in the inverted castle. The boy is decked out with all his nimbleness from the opener, which makes it fun to treat this like an arcade boss rush, putting Richter's abilities to the test as he battles increasingly hostile encounters. Unfortunately, the inverted castle is a nightmare to travel through without becoming a bat. Richter has to do this blade jump thing to get around, and all that cramped level design you had to fly around as Alucard, you now get to headbutt all the damn time. Going through the reverse clock tower as Richter gave me skin lesions. Still though, both maps are completely playable, and it's genuinely a very cool bonus to get to play as its version of Richter with all his new bells and whistles. Symphony has a ton of replay value overall. This game consumed so many hours of my high school career because I was obsessed with mapping out routes in my head, seeing how fast I could get to the center of the reverse castle, or experimenting with how the game plays if I grabbed different upgrades in different orders, or favored certain equipment over others. There's so much fun to be had in deciding how you're going to approach a particular playthrough of Symphony. Way more fun than you would ever have doing chemistry homework from that guy who hits on all the lady teachers and called the special ed kids barn animals at one time. I'm speaking from experience. God, Symphony of the Night is sublime. I can't believe it's taken me this long to return to it. It's a game so layered and detailed that every playthrough you're bound to find something new about it, some thoughtful way you can interact with this gorgeously painted world. A group of talented artists were each bringing their unique tastes and flourishes to this structure, and as they built, each craftsman influenced one another to shape a Castlevania that emerged a Gothic masterpiece from top to bottom. The fact that the game is a melting pot of different styles and ideas that eventually all fit together makes it more like a cozy quilt with a crazy pattern than some gay shit like Monopoly. Symphony is a wholly unique piece of art, and even among contemporaries in a genre it solidified, this adventure is still a standout. Even as I look back at my footage, I'm salivating, frothing at the mouth for another chance to conquer this creature of chaos. Sure, the reverse castle is kind of a drag, but I think there's plenty tucked away in that awkward level design that makes the trip worth it. The whole trip is worth it just to feel how Alucard moves in this space. I'm not kidding, that alone makes exploring the castle feel fun to me. But there's plenty to incentivize that movement, whether you're on the hunt for a cool new hat or you want to kick the shit out of Beelzebub. Not everything you find is going to make you jump for joy, but I enjoy the level of flexibility these RPG mechanics provide so much that I'll happily take that trade-off. Your mileage may vary though, because if Symphony of the Night shot my mother, I would find a way to make it her fault. Play this game. You owe yourself a little treat. I've come back to it many times and have every intention to do so again. It's not perfect, I'll admit, but the sum is so much greater than its parts that there is absolutely nothing about Symphony of the Night that gives me hesitation when I think about replaying it. In fact, I should be replaying it right now. Indeed, let me come forth and drink from the teat of this large and juicy mother pig again and again. That was fucking horrible. Why did I write that?